In this program, we are going to find out how a living organism responds to situations of stress. We will also see that in human beings, the response is no longer suitably adapted to the conditions of contemporary life. And finally, we will discover that even materials have a stressful life. You're late for an important meeting. You get a parking ticket. You have a fight with your boss. What all these situations have in common is that they age you 10 years. You know the symptoms: thumping heart, lump in the throat, cold sweat. Life today makes us inclined to view stress as a hardship, but stress also has its beneficial effects. It's a first-rate tonic that can make you surpass yourself. It is to a Canadian researcher, Hans Selye, that we owe the definition of biological distress syndrome, better known as stress. The Earth's environment is subjected to continuous variations: light constantly alternating with darkness, warmth with cold, humidity with dryness. Conversely, humans must maintain their temperature, water content, and chemical composition as constant as possible. This stability is crucial to the vital chemical reactions that go on in their bodies. Living organisms must therefore constantly adapt to the whims of their environment. When their environment changes, living organisms react by undergoing physiological changes of varying degrees. These overall physiological responses constitute what is known as the state of stress. All living beings, animal or plant, are victims of stress on a regular basis. For a plant, for example, lack of water is a source of stress. When a plant is deprived of water, the concentration of sugars and mineral salts in its sap increases. Alerted by the signal, the plant activates a series of mechanisms to avoid dehydration. Photosynthesis, by which the plant converts water and the air's carbon dioxide into sugars, is slowed down. The stomata, minute pores in the epidermis of the leaves, close. If the drought persists, some leaves will curl up and fall off, cutting water loss even more. The state of stress is therefore useful for the plant, since it enables it to adapt to the changes it is subjected to and to maintain its integrity. When the plant is watered, the stress ends and it resumes its normal state. Stress is also what enables animals and man to adjust to changes that may threaten them. When a person is exposed to a danger in this environment, a series of nervous and hormonal responses immediately begin occurring in his system. The first of these responses is the reaction of alarm. During this phase, a series of physiological adjustments prepare the organism for one of two possible actions: fight or flight. First, the danger signal is transmitted to the brain. The sympathetic nervous system, made up of a network of nerves through the body, goes into action as well. It orders the suprarenals, small glands located above the kidneys, to secrete a hormone called adrenaline. Then several physiological changes take place. Breathing quickens. The heart beats harder, faster. The blood leaves the digestive organs to head toward the muscles and the limbs, and blood pressure rises. The senses are stimulated to better perceive the danger. The individual is now ready to fight or flee the threat weighing upon him. However, if the individual gives up both fight and flight, and the threat persists, a second phase begins, the adaptation response. During this phase, the organism attempts to resist the object of stress. Acting on signals from the brain, the suprarenal glands emit another hormone, cortisol. The cortisol spreads through the entire body. Among its many effects, cortisol causes the sugar level in the blood to rise. It thus makes a ready-made source of energy available to the organism. With this supplementary energy, the individual can survive sustained periods of fasting or turn in remarkable physical performances. Both these kinds of responses are immensely useful in the case of major stress, such as undergoing surgery. The person on the operating table will secrete large amounts of cortisol. The cortisol will make the body's reactions to allergies diminish, enabling it to tolerate the foreign bodies being inserted into it. Amino acids, the basic molecules of the proteins that compose flesh, are also released into the blood. They will facilitate post-operative tissue repair and healing. Lastly, the blood thickens, which helps it coagulate. In cases such as these, stress can save your life. But when you have been exposed to the source of stress for too long or too chronically, your mechanisms of adaptation finally collapse. Incapable of resisting any more, the organism goes into the third and final phase, the exhaustion response. Its energy reserves seriously decline, and the body becomes incapable of resisting the aggression. Stress, a response essential to life, can also cause death. In human beings, there are countless stress-causing agents, unpleasant physical conditions, psychological abuse, and even emotions. But regardless of what they are, objects of stress trigger the same sequence of physical responses in any given person. The body does not distinguish between mortal danger and the illusion of such a danger. In daily life, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between real threats and fictitious threats. Both contribute to increasing our level of discomfort. The fear of going bankrupt or failing an exam is just as exhausting as a real bankruptcy or failure would be. But be careful. You mustn't believe that everything is in our head. If that were so, all you'd need to do to ward off stress is to believe you are invincible. Stress is part and parcel of everyday life, but the more you accumulate it, the more liable you are to see your health or performance deteriorate. Stress is essential to life. It enables all living things, animals, plants, to adapt to the changing conditions in their environment. For any living organism, the absence of stress means death. And yet, stress has become the bane of today's world. In many people, it reaches levels where it affects their efficiency at work, creates psychological and health problems, and can even lead to death. Then stress ceases to be beneficial and becomes a harmful agent. Why, in contemporary society, does distress accompany stress? According to some scientists, our bodily responses to stressful agents were programmed thousands of years ago, long before our civilization. These physiological responses, such as the acceleration of the heartbeat, the increase in oxygen intake, or the rise in blood sugar levels, prepared the body to fight or flee a serious threat. Today, the sources of stress we are exposed to seldom threaten our lives. As a rule, the fight or flight responses are inappropriate for these stresses. But our bodily responses have not changed. They still prepare us for violent action. In our society, such responses are inadequate. Moreover, our body was designed to endure short-lived stresses. Conversely, life today exposes us to stress almost relentlessly. Over time, chronic stress becomes a severe threat to health. The consequences of prolonged stress vary from one person to the next. In some people, long-term stress causes high blood pressure. In others, deposits of cholesterol in the arteries. These factors increase the risks of heart and arterial disease. Others will react to stress by secreting a higher level of the hormone cortisol. Too much of this hormone will make the walls of the stomach less resistant to the acid the stomach secretes. Ulcers can begin forming. In addition, cortisol alters the organism's resistance to infections and illnesses. Scientists believe that this weakening of the immune system could cause cancers. Cancer cells may take advantage of the weak state of the organism to multiply and produce a tumor. Finally, stress often leads to psychological disorders. The most common psychological effects of stress are anxiety, fatigue, and depression. These effects depend both on people's personality and their environment. Psychologists distinguish two major personality types. Type A personalities are ambitious and competitive people who appear to be in a perpetual race against the clock and other people. In Type A individuals, stress triggers aggressive responses and often leads to heart disease. Type B personalities are less ambitious and competitive. In them, stress leads to fatigue and depression instead. In fact, researchers agree that stress results from a mismatch between the individual and his environment. For some people, a job lacking challenge can be as stressful as a demanding job requiring a great deal of responsibility. People respond to stress each in their own way and have their own level of tolerance. Although we may not be able to eliminate stress, we can learn to cope with it. Experts suggest stress management workshops, where body stress is fought by learning, for example, relaxation techniques. They're also convinced that we can ward off emotional stress by learning to organize our lives better and know ourselves better. Due to occupational stress and its devastating effects, increasing numbers of employees now have access to stress management and prevention programs. Researchers have developed a computer program that enables employees to measure their stress, discover its source, and diagnose the burnout that is often the result. The computer poses a series of questions on work-related emotions. It then compares the subject's answers to those of a reference group and presents them in graphic form. Thanks to this tool, employers can set up effective assistance programs. One day, we hope to be able to reduce the high social price caused by this simple biological response to the environment called stress. There is a way to increase your resistance to stress and make it work for you. Of course, a healthy life is a prerequisite. You can't overeat, smoke, drink too much coffee or alcohol, or take too many tranquilizers. You must get enough sleep, exercise, and have an emotionally and financially stable life. What your mother always told you. But that may not be the kind of life you really want. The most important thing, above all else, is to have a positive mental attitude. Be a little realistic and have a good sense of humor. In fact, stress is a universal concept. Even materials have a stressful life. What do the wings of a flying plane, the pillars of a bridge, and the cables holding up the roof of a stadium have in common? All of them are subjected to intense stress. Engineers employ the notion of stressful agents to designate anything that modifies the solidity of a material or an object. These stressful agents are also called constraints. Certain constraints, such as the compression exerted on a bridge's pillars, are physical in nature. Others, such as corrosion, for example, are of a chemical nature. Even radiation, such as the sun's ultraviolet rays, will in the long run alter some materials. For these materials, the rays constitute a source of stress. Every material possesses a specific degree of resistance to stress. That resistance can be determined in laboratory tests. When a material is subjected to a constraint, a tension for instance, the material loses its shape. The extent of the loss of shape depends on the intensity of the stress applied. After being subjected to slight stress, some materials, like metals, will regain their shape. On the other hand, stress that is too strong may cause the material to become irreversibly deformed or even break. The stress resistance of materials is also affected by temperatures and weather conditions. The higher the temperature, the less resistant the material. A material subjected to an average intensity of stress will also bend out of shape eventually. This deformation, called fatigue, is one of the main causes of a car's deterioration. For engineers, a material's resistance to stress is the first criterion in the making of an object. The material's properties must be perfectly suited to the constraints the object will be subjected to. But stress resistance is not only a feature of lifeless material. The structures that make up our body's frame, our muscles, bones, tendons, and ligaments, also endure considerable stress. For example, a bone will withstand almost as much tension as aluminum and is almost as rigid as steel. Our various organs are able to resist such constraints thanks to their sophisticated inner geometry designed to match the function they are assigned. For instance, a bone's geometry consists of a rigid outer envelope and a spongy and elastic inner structure in the shape of a honeycomb. Scientists use various approaches to study the properties of biological materials. One of these techniques involves subjecting an anatomical structure to heavy loads. The stress imposed on the organ and the degree to which it will stretch are measured very precisely to determine its rigidity. Other devices have been developed to check the behavior of implants, such as ligament prostheses. This device reproduces the complex organization of the constraints to which the ligaments of the knee are subjected, the tension generated by the stretching of the ligament, the bending caused by flexion, and torsion. These constraints may be applied up to 3 times per second. It is thus possible to simulate in a few weeks several years of the prostheses' use. Thanks to computers, scientists can go much further in their research on stress to biological material and determine the sources of some disorders. A sophisticated technique enables them to reconstruct in 3 dimensions and in great detail a structure as intricate as a vertebra. First, a medical scanner provides images of a section of a patient's spine. A computer then assembles and analyzes the images. An exact representation of the vertebra is made. The image can be looked at from any angle. It is therefore possible to predict how the vertebra will behave when subjected to various stresses and to identify its weak areas. A powerful diagnostic tool, This computer technique can also help scientists develop better adapted prostheses. A computer modeling of the articulation of a knee provides very precise data on the shape of the bones that make up the joint. These data can help the experts make a metal prosthesis, which will be an exact replica of the original. This technique, still in the experimental stage, could lead to personalized prostheses made to measure for each individual. Bend or break. You know that expression? We have no choice. Stress is something we have to cope with constantly. A tip? Physical contact is a good way to reduce the pressure. So the next time you take an exam, bring along a friend to hold your hand.